And we will move on to the work session. Wayne was advertised, it was not going to start at any particular time, so we're simply going to roll. I do draw your attention to a piece of mail that's in your mailbox. It's the resolution that we did not have a motion for at the last council meeting. The letter itself is from Mark Hayes. He explains it in a little more detail. So I know that the general feeling of the council members was this is going to be brought to the electorate, and the electorate should make the choice. But I did feel that I should share that letter with you so that you can see the position of the meeting now. Okay. The main purpose of this special work session is to talk about our friend, the 2020 budget. A couple of you have reached out to Carrie, and thank you for that. We always are able to tweak it and make it a little finer and just a little closer. As the year progresses, when Carrie has more actuals that she actually can work with. So in front of you, there is a revised city draft budget for 2020. Hopefully, John, did you get one? And Keith, did you get one? Okay. And of course, you can have one as well, Kevin, if you so much. And Bailey, you probably want one as well. So I'm going to, at this point, just be quiet, and I'm going to ask Carrie. Can you take us through the latest and greatest and what some of the changes are that you're working on, please?
There's a table of contents, just past the cover page. I'm going to refer to that, and any questions you have to ask. Page 3 is the overall summary of total revenues and total expenses. Our revenue highlights are the changes in sales tax due to the internet sales tax legislation. We're proposing $635,000 increase from our 2019 budget. Property taxes are 15% of total revenues, as they were last year. Sales tax increased a little bit more as a percent of total revenues. We've increased property taxes $211,000.
Can I ask you a question? That's what, when I was asking you about that earlier, that's an increase over the budget projection last year.
Right, that's an increase over budget.
So during 2018, it says our actual property tax revenue was $2.831 million. That's what my question was. Now the property tax is 2.771. So that's a decrease, which with the housing start growth we've had, I don't know how we would step backwards.
Let me pull that up.
So to be clear, the property tax is based on those homes that are on the roster January the 1st, 2019.
I did not base it on those homes that were on the roster. I've done that before in previous years, and it never panned out to work out that way.
Because we were also told by the assessor that there's roughly bad debt, 20%.
What Doug is referring to is this 2018 actual numbers of 2.8 million. I'm projecting only 2.4 million actual for 2019. I based the 2020 budget off of, first I did a forecast based on what we had so far at the end of September. I annualized it and then forecast using a forecast formula in Excel. That seemed too low. So I didn't like how the forecast turned out. So I went instead to a calculation based on our current surplus over budget. And I annualized that surplus, added it to our 2019 budget to get to an adjusted forecast of these amounts. So I used this calculation instead of this calculation. Now, the property tax, using the forecast, the straight levy, not dedicated to the fire department, or the police department pension, it did come in higher. It came in at 2.247 using the forecast formula, but to be conservative, I used this adjusted forecast. And again, this is just a budget. It's not actual, it doesn't have any effect on our actual numbers. But I'm happy to change it to the forecast.
No, I'm just saying, I'm just curious, I understand.
Okay,
I just
yeah.
was, I just saw it went down versus what was actual.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense, but what we're seeing doesn't make any sense either. Now, we did inquire, I had sent an inquiry to Rod Greaves' office a few months ago when I saw property taxes going down and it didn't make any sense. And at that time, they didn't have an answer for us. But since then, they did meet with the mayor and told him what this problem was with the personal property tax being miscalculated on auto sales. And so that's probably what has happened. But then again, I mean, I'm still perfectly willing to increase the property tax budget.
Look at it as a cushion.
Yes, it could be done.
I hate to come in at the end of the year under budget, so I like to be conservative. I'd rather come in over budget with our actuals than under budget.
Carrie, would you say again, or show me again, where the actual 2019 annualized? So take year-to-date and annualize it for
Okay.
total property taxes.
The actual 2019 annualized is, we were at this at the end of September.
Right?
That was 9 months, so I divided that by 9 and multiplied it by 12. And so the annualized is the sum of these three calculations.
Okay, so 2.47 is the annualized of actuals to date.
Yes.
And
I haven't updated it. We do have October's numbers now. But I haven't
Okay.
updated it.
And so I'd be hard pressed to think of that going down, right? That doesn't seem like property tax is a number that goes down year over year
I think
for the
so.
last.
No.
So if it's 2.47 this year, it seems to me that would be the starting point. We would expect at least that much next year. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, and we're at requesting 2.77?
Right.
Okay, all right, so we're anticipating some growth over the actuals of the current year.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay. Our franchise taxes are also 15% of our total revenue, and they continue to go down. We'll speak about those on page 6, I think. Yeah. I have decreased them 132,000 additional. Let me look at those for the life. You can see that we started going down after 2016. We went from 1.9 million to 1.7, then back up to 1.832. Annualized, I've got us at 1.809 for 2019. Again, I used the same method. I used a forecast formula. Didn't like it. It was too high. I liked it for some of them and for some of the categories, major categories, and then I used an adjusted forecast for some of them. That is our only revenue source, though, that I do show decreasing. County turnback, county and state turnback, we weren't able to get an answer from Arkansas Municipal League on the new tax, gas tax, how it would affect our turnback, so basically I left it the same.
What that is the new 3-cent tax on normal gas, 6 cents tax on diesel that went into effect. I was watching the news one day 4 weeks ago, and they had said that that was going to increase the revenue at the state level by some $93 million. And so I called the judge and I said, are you anticipating an increase in your turnback? Because we've been told 0 increase year over year. And he said, yes, we're anticipating 400,000. So then I went to the municipal league, because they are the ones that tell us what the new turnback rate is going to be. And I have many times pinged Mark and even spoken to him, and he doesn't have an answer. And so I guess maybe Doug is another windfall if it happens to work out. But I'm not holding my breath. But that's where that's coming from.
We had an answer, something to the effect of a legislative, depending on the legislative outcome.
Yeah,
That made no sense at all. Okay, on page 7 is the summary of the revenue.
I guess just a quick question. On the sales tax trending that's been coming in so far, so this is through October on here, I know. On the statement that's ended September the 30th, is this September to September, the trending, like the September sales tax revenue?
No, it's only
If
January
this
to
is-
September.
But I'm in our September roll-up, the one that you publish. So that's through this September as well. They're
In our
apples to
September.
apples.
What do you mean by roll-up?
Okay, well, so the
The financial
financial
statement?
statement you put out this is through September the 30th.
Yeah, January
So-
to September.
Right. Is that including this September number right here, or is it actually August? It's actually through this number right here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We
So
haven't-
they're
yeah, I
apples to
haven't
apples.
issued October
Okay.
financial statements yet. Yep. Any other questions?
So on the sales tax, between November 12, when we had a rough draft, and then you sent us that email, pretty optimistic, happy about the sales tax results. So was the revenue ratcheted up a little in this latest version? The total revenue is a little bit higher.
In the budget version?
Yeah, the one you just handed us today.
It's higher than our
Yeah.
previous meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it? No, that's what.
No, I don't
that's-
think so, because
The
I had
total
already...
revenue is slightly higher, but I wasn't sure why.
I was going to change it if the October number came in less than what I thought it would, but it didn't, and so I left it the same.
Yeah, okay. So it might be a little conservative.
No, I was being generous in the budget packet that we used last time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and since the sales tax came in what I expected it to because of the internet
Oh, I
increase,
see what you mean.
then I left it
Yeah.
the same.
So it's good news, but you were expecting good news?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
because the mayor and I have a bet.
Dinner at Ruth's Chris?
Huh?
Dinner at Ruth's Chris?
Something like that, but
Yeah, instead of
he's
McDonald's.
already lost.
Pardon me?
Yeah, she gets to take the
Yeah.
ballot.
Well, you know,
That's what I'm saying. Or what I
the
meant.
budget for 2019 city sales tax was $2.1 million.
Yes.
And I just, through October, and I just used the 3 months of the internet sales tax as a benchmark and averaged it. And that would be $414,000 divided by 2. So versus a budget of $2.132 million, I've got it if it holds, the trend holds true, it should come in about 2.157, so it's gonna be just about right on to the budget projection.
And I had
The county's
actually,
gonna be
last
up-
year, we budgeted very conservative because I thought we would be in a recession this year, so. And I didn't know if the internet sales tax
Yeah,
was
and the
going.
county, if the trend holds true, is gonna come in at about 6,551 versus 6,419, so it's only about 100 grand more. So they're, you know, they were pretty close.
Well, right now, we're running at 181,000 total surplus for both combined. 100,000, like you said, for,
Which was your October update.
hmm,
108 was the October update.
yes. Any questions on page 7? The revenues summary?
There's an increase in the building inspection fees,
Mhm.
about $33,000. Is that based on an increase in fee schedule, or is
No.
that?
No,
an
just
increase in-
based on the trend. Let me see.
What's the latest building permit count for the year? I haven't seen one in a while, I don't believe. Are we still about on?
We're on
just a
target for
little bit
about
behind last year?
255, Doug?
Between that 260, we're in 22 and a half a month average.
Are we behind last year?
Just slightly, right?
Just barely, just close, not with last year.
But I will tell you, Larry, the actual declared value of the homes has gone up. So that's been encouraging. But it's whatever's on that roll, not the personal, just the property tax. On January the 1st of each year is what you're going to get the next year.
And 2021 is, I believe is the year they're gonna reevaluate.
Yes, they will
revalue.
redo all of them again. So we won't be able to use that probably till '23, depending how long it takes them to go through it. It's similar to the census. We will be using the new census data probably to build the 2022 budget, because it won't be ready in time.
Then I have a couple of graphs, well, actually only one revenue graph, just to highlight again that we're very dependent on our sales tax. 50% of our revenues come from sales tax. The highlights for the expenditures are on page 9. And I had mentioned this at the last meeting, that we've moved all the telephone and internet expense to the IT department, so you're going to see a decrease in the utilities budget in every department, and a huge increase in IT for that. We've moved traffic light maintenance from the street department to community development, so you'll see that will offset street department going down and for operations and community development increasing. Again, we had mentioned the drop in the reimbursements on the SAFER grant for the 9 fire department employees operating under that grant. The third year has them reducing our reimbursement from 65% to 35%.
And in the next year, we fully fund it.
Yes.
Or we let some go.
We can do that as an option, you're right, there was no restriction on
Right.
the grant itself that we had to keep.
Yep. Not that we would do that, but which comes to shove, you never know.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that to you, Steve. We tell you first about 5 or 6 minutes before we did it.
That's why y'all work. Head count?
Yeah, the changes in head count are highlighted on pages 9 and 10. 2 less in admin, 1 more in community development, 2 additional full-time employees in police and 1 additional in the street department. You already knew medical insurance had increased. Budget might change if I get our actual benefit elections in before you actually approve the final budget.
Open enrollment is next week, isn't
I
it?
think so.
Will that affect the cost at all, the enrollment, is because of participation or not, or how they elect to go?
Yes.
I mean, people have family coverage
Yes.
and all that.
Yeah.
That's true, Larry.
Yeah. We have some people, who have a spouse working here that, they don't
Maybe
have
here,
any.
they may be at another
Right,
location.
right, it just depends which department.
I'd just like to go over the second to last point, if I may, please, on page 9. And so the 1 additional FTE in community development is for a new code enforcement officer. We have seen a remarkable jump since Doug's been here, because he has a code enforcement background. Plus, we have been finally responding to more and more of the complaints that keep rolling in, because we have 2 very good people at the moment. Doug, can you share with council, please, the increases that you're seeing in the citations?
Sure. Notices issued in 2018 was about 1,500, and through October in 2019, we had issued about 1,800. So 300 more through October than we issued the entire year of last year.
And we are now seeing more and more actually going through the court system as well, Council?
Yes, we are, and we've got some good cooperation from our judge, who's making them come back and show compliance as a term of their sentence. So, in fact, we'll do that again Thursday. We've got 3 or 4 on the list. They'll come in at 8:30 in the morning, and Cheyenne, our code enforcement officer, is there, and he'll know whether it's cleaned up or how's it going, and he'll have a discussion with the violator about whether they've done something or whether they haven't. He held 1 in contempt last month, and that's just more additional fines and unnecessary, but it happens. We don't look for that, but the court has to do something to try to get enforcement. And so I've definitely seen an increase in the number of citations, and it has been, I think, effective in a lot of cases, so yes. So,
I tell you, from my perspective, I mean, just welcome. Whenever I first started 3 years ago, that is what most of my emails were about, code enforcement. We had a lot of conversations, and, there's not any way Cheyenne can cover the whole entire community, I know that. So I'm not saying she's just out and made all the people on the west side happy. She's had to cover the whole city. But I rarely get an email now about code enforcement complaints, or for whatever it may be. So it's having some positive impact on the community, I think, as a whole.
I do too. Could I
Sure.
make a couple comments and maybe ask a couple questions too? And that is accolades, Doug, to you and your department for being efficient with the resources that you have. And I'm curious for us to, I'm curious to understand, and maybe Mayor or other members of council can kind of explain what's the principle behind code enforcement as per Bella Vista, because I know that we don't have time or interest really in batting 1,000%. So we're trying to work with, I've heard it mentioned that kind of there was a backlog even of complaints. And I want to think now, perhaps with the efficiencies that have been brought about over the past year, that we no longer have a backlog of complaints. And then how far beyond complaints do we want to go? Given the uniqueness of Bella Vista, we want to maintain a good relationship with our citizens. We don't want them to feel like every time they turn around, the city's back at their front door citing some violation or the other. So what's our principle here? Is it to go out after the worst case offenders and where people have complained? Or is it to try to to try to police the entire organization at a very, very high compliance rate. What is it we're trying to,
Sure.
what is it we're trying to
Doug,
get?
before you answer, would you also build in the other function that we have been struggling to fill, and I think we may have a plan for it, which is the review?
Sure. Yeah, 1,000% would be a tough goal, but we're currently not backlogged on complaints. As complaints come in, they get assigned, and those properties get inspected within a couple days. But as the demographic in the city and population changes, households moving from 2 people to 3 to 4, the number of complaints go up per household. And instead of constantly chasing complaints, we feel that we can decrease the number of complaints if the entire city is strategically and systematically inspected and surveyed, instead of just seeing a neighborhood once a month when we go to a complaint, doing a 360-degree survey of the adjacent properties. A code officer's been able to go out and hit certain parts of town every month instead of once every 6 months. And so we feel that an additional code officer can reduce those complaints. The neighbors can see our trucks in the neighborhood getting things done and cleaned up before it results in a complaint. And when I first started, our staff expressed the need for 2 positions, one being a code officer so that we would have one for east, one for central, and one for the west part of the town. And then their additional concern was the lack of a plans examiner for our building inspectors. That position used to exist and got eliminated a while back. And so what we're going to try to do, if you all approve this budget and allow an additional person next year, is combine duties with a code officer and a plans examiner. We have a staff that has already been to plans examining certification class, and we feel that with the refresher course, they can take that burden off of our building inspectors, because our building inspectors are not trained to do those plans examining, especially the commercial jobs that we do. So I think that will take a lot of the stress and work off of them, because they're doing plans examining before they go out for the day to do inspections. So we're going to try to cover both of those jobs with one additional increase in staff.
Doug, I think the ideal situation for code enforcement, you tell me if I'm wrong in how I think about this, the ideal outcome in terms of a code enforcement officer's action is to point out a violation and have the violation remedied. Not to have to issue a citation, not to have court proceedings, not to have liens.
Correct.
Those are all last resort type activities.
Compliance is obviously the goal, and the 1% that does not comply is what ends up in court.
Well, and I'm very keen that we are able to pursue with every practical means those kinds of outcomes. The outcome of, hey, this is a violation, we want the homeowner to fix that, and they fix it. And the ones that go beyond that, it seems to me that the more code enforcement officers we have, there's going to be a certain percent of violators that do not fix the situation. And then we end up with citations, we could end up in court proceedings, and the whole thing kind of breeds upon itself more and more and more. And I think the only point that I make here is that as an organization, as a city, we want to be very sensitive to that relationship that we have, whereby that we're doing the right thing for the city in terms of keeping a certain standard of compliance and knowing it's not ever going to be 100% compliance, and that we want to nurture a good relationship with our citizens so that there's more encouragement than there is penalty. Is that as far as a principle goes, is that fair for the city to kind of take that approach?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I can't believe they've not always done that. Giving you every benefit before we have to put the hammer down.
Steve, just to give you a little information, this goes back a few years. One of the things I saw about the code enforcement process was, yes, we had people out in the field. Yes, they leave a door hanger and says, you know, you've got a car in the yard, you can't, that violates the code. I'm gonna come back in X number of days to see if you fixed it. Have a nice day. And then maybe it hasn't been remedied, and then maybe a letter goes out, and then there'd be, well, you know, this violates the code, you could get a citation, all that. And then unfortunately, the citation would never come because they couldn't find them, or there wasn't an aggressive enough approach in just finding them to write them the citation. And then you get it's almost, you've got to follow through to let people know that the government can do this. If you're warning and never doing anything,
Sure.
then word can get out
Sure.
and say, you know, they just leave you a door hanger, don't worry about it, they'll go away, they'll wear out. And so, I mean, that was never really the case, but I think that can breed a thought process and a conversation among people in the community sometimes.
Right.
But now, when we send that notice, or we have a face-to-face, which I think we're much more able to do now, then we do follow through, and we'll be there. And so,
Right.
not that they want to write tickets, but again, you know, we're going to have to do what we have to do in order to make sure the situation is remedied, and we can't let people just thumb their nose at the entire process.
No.
Because it's unfair to the rest of the community.
Absolutely. Well, what I'm glad I'm not hearing is that we feel like there are pockets of chronic non-compliance in the city. I know you have individual property owners that don't like city ordinances and don't choose to follow many of them. And in some cases, those have to be targeted because they're reducing the standard for the rest of the city. But I'm glad to hear that we don't feel like there's a chronic problem. I think, you know, when we're approving a head count, it tends to be something that we have to live with for a long period of time. So I just want to make sure I understood kind of where we at here with regard to, is there a backlog? Is there a problem, a specific problem we're trying to solve? Or is it just, as we look across the numbers, we feel like another code enforcement officer is necessary to maintain the standards that are reflected in the ordinances of the city of Bella Vista? Is that where we are?
I would agree with that. Yeah, when you look at the size of this city and the number of streets and the miles of streets, if you, and you only have, we had 1.5 code officer for my first 10 months, now we have 2, and they just simply can't cover every street. You can't maintain the standard and the beauty of the neighborhoods when a code officer only goes through a neighborhood once a year or once every 6 months. And so I feel that stepping it up to 1 per region, east, central, and west, would certainly help maintain and even improve the beauty of the neighborhoods.
And you know, the other opportunity too, you know, Steve, is when you have the ability to bring them into compliance, it's an education opportunity. And so there is definitely, not everybody can be a code enforcement officer. I don't think I could do it. But it's an opportunity to sit down with the person as well and try to help them understand the impact it has on the community in their immediate neighborhood. And it takes a very special person to be able to do that. And I think we're very fortunate with the 2 we have, and I think we'll still have those same kind of attributes that we're looking for if you approve this one.
I think it's welcome. I think most residents, by and large, are going to apply it. I really do, because it's a huge concern in Bella Vista. So.
It's not an easy job. If you could sit in our office and listen to just the number of phone calls that those 2 receive on the days that they're in the office, I would wager between 12 and 15 calls a day where the caller is not happy and upset. That takes a toll on most folks when you do that week after week after week. And the way they handle them is hats off to them. It's a tough job. I know that when I was in a similar position in Little Rock, at one point in a 2-year period, I counted over 35 code officers had quit. So we were constantly filling those positions, but the 2 that we have now are certainly doing a good job.
Imagine working with Ms. Smith 15 times a day and go from there.
So if I may, I'd like to move over to the police department. The 2 additional FTEs are in CID, which is criminal investigation. Chief, perhaps you can describe the load, because I know that the caseload has become unbearable with those that are here today.
Sure. Currently in CID, I have 4 individuals, and one is the lieutenant who carries a caseload as a detective, which I'd rather him not, because then he can't really manage the folks like he should. The other is a narcotics officer that I just promoted, or gave him the title of detective, but he, with him, brought his own caseload. So in reality, I have 2 standard detectives working at this time. The average, so we did a little study, and all you folks got this a while back, but just for a refresher, I'm excited to refresh myself as well as we sat here. The average population to detective ratio for all cities or all law enforcement agencies in Benton County averages out to approximately 3,700 residents per detective. Okay, some a little higher and a little lower than others, but on average, if you average all the agencies, it's 3,700 residents per detective. We are currently sitting at 7,200 and change residents per detective, so we have substantially more residents than detective. Now, different crime ratios in different jurisdictions, so it's not all apples to apples, but it is a good metric to look at. And then we continue on with some metrics, and we look at the average caseload detectives carry, okay, which is assigned open cases that they're assigned that they're working on actively to try to resolve with an arrest or something, some sort of case closure. In all other agencies around us, the average caseload is 35. The average caseload for other agencies is between 5 and 12 cases per detective. Our detectives carry an average open caseload of 35 to 45 cases. So you can see it's a lot more work. And all that means is that prioritization takes place. Obviously, felony cases, serious cases get handled. Obviously, what happens, those lower level cases, they turn out to a lot of times be quality of life type issues. Somebody broke into my car. They're not crimes against people, but they're still things we want to resolve. They obviously don't get the attention they should really get. Over time, what's going to happen is those quality of life type crimes, those lower level crimes, if we don't resolve them and can't put the time into them we need to, then we're not going to have contact or intervene with those suspects at the lower level crimes, which they'll just graduate later on to felony type crimes, or they'll just continue to commit these lower level quality issue type crimes in the city, which become a big problem. So this study was first done looking at adding 3 detectives. At the time, I thought the city at the time, I think adding 2 detectives is at least a good bare minimum amount, which will get us a lot further along at this time. So that was my recommendation to the mayor, and so that's where we came up with 2 detectives. As far as you look at some of our trends as far as work, as far as case load, calls for service, arrest, when we look at some of the trends, if you look at between 2017 and 2019, if we average out, well, we're almost to the end of the year anyways, between 2017 and 2019, the department has done about 4,000 more, taken in about 4,000 more incidents, okay? 4,000 more incidents between 2017 and 2019 with no additional, as far as detectives to investigate those incidents, okay? And then we've made an additional, on average, 300 more arrests, okay? Those are arrests that then we need to do follow-up on and things like that a lot of times with the detectives. So if you look at this sort of stuff, you can just see that we have, when I first got here, we were really understaffed in patrol and our detective bureau. We did a good job beefing up patrol. With that comes more activity, more arrests, more incidents. It all trickles up to the detectives who then have to follow up and investigate, and we haven't had the opportunity yet to beef up CID, and that's what this is all about right here, is getting CID on par of where patrol is in order to keep up with the crimes that are being committed and the investigations that take place. And I think this will get us a good way there, and there'll be some more in the future, but I think this will do us good probably for a couple years as far as having this ability to catch up on things. And so that in a nutshell is kind of the need of why we need it, okay? It's not that we're not investigating serious crimes now, because no serious crimes ever fall through the cracks, but it's the lower level things that are quality of life issues. I mean, it's serious to people if their car gets broken into. Don't take me wrong when I say it's not a serious crime. It's not a crime against a person, though. So those are the things we need to deal with as we move forward as a city.
Any questions for Chief?
Chief Graves, you mentioned today the detective count is at 4, but you say you promoted somebody. Did you flip them from an officer to a detective?
So right now I have, okay, so we initially had 2 detectives, line detectives, and a lieutenant, but they all did the same work, my lieutenant here. And then we had a narcotics officer, if you remember, I'm not sure if you were part of council at the time, but there was a 2017, I think-ish, then a 2017, beginning of 2018, I had a narcotics officer to deal with narcotics, okay? Well, he generated his own caseload and dealt with that himself, but what I found is that really he needed to be a detective to deal with some of his peers in that same sort of work. Plus it allowed me, when the Detective Bureau got overwhelmed, to slide a few detective cases to him to investigate, because then he was an actual regular detective. So yeah, that happened a while back. I think that happened in last year's budget. But when I say I only have 2 detectives, he is a detective, but he's a narcotics detective, so his position, he generates his own work. So he doesn't really take any of the caseload unless they're really, really slammed and they have some real priority cases and some things just have to get done, then he'll help out. For the most part, though, he does his own caseload because he generates his own work.
You know what, I apologize. I didn't look at your last numbers. Serious crime in Bella Vista, how are we trending? You know, and what do you classify serious crime?
Serious crimes are usually crimes against people.
And how's that?
Homicides, your rapes, your aggravated assaults, your assaults. And those are trending usually pretty low. We don't have a lot of serious crime here, though we do have it. But population-wise, I think I know we're lower than average on those serious type crimes against people, as far as physical crimes against people. But that doesn't But larcenies, burglaries, thefts, we have quite a few of those, and they're on par with most other cities our size.
Seems like we might have had a little problem with some meth operations going on here for a little while. How's that?
Well, sure. That has been something that it's always, I think it's been relatively steady over the years, and I think Councilmember Wozniak can attest to that. But we didn't have the resources really to address it on an individual basis, and since my narcotics officer is in place now, narcotics detective. We have seen an increase in that, but not an increase because I think it's increased. I think it increased because we've been able to work it and draw it out and discover it. In law enforcement, when you address something specifically, you see this big spike, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at this spike. Well, it's always been there, but we haven't really had the resources to address it. So we've had over the last few years an increase. You'd see an increase in narcotics warrants being served. Okay, maybe 12 or 15 narcotics warrants on an annual basis being served. Whereas maybe before we put the narcotics officer in place, maybe the year prior you only saw 2 or 3. Well, that's not because all of a sudden we had a big spike. It's because now we have somebody to address it specifically.
Anything else? Okay, the last increase in headcount, thank you, Chief, is over in the Streets Department. Mike is asking for an additional mechanic. We have, 153 cars now that you're servicing?
The count's 161.
161?
Vehicles.
And it's just
cars.
Vehicles,
Yes,
yeah.
Trucks, some of them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Trucks.
combination
Diesel.
of heavy equipment, bulldozer graders.
And you're not really
police cars.
doing any of the fire?
We do everything but the fire engines and the ambulances.
Right. That's when Chief himself actually addresses that and gets out his spanner? Right. So that's, so on the plus side, that's an increase of 4 heads, but if you look at the point just above it, I want to congratulate both Carrie and Cassie for a reduction of 2 heads. Carrie has spent a great deal of time mechanizing the whole process flow in payables and receivables and doing the budget, so that we had one of our employees move on earlier this year. We saw no reason to backfill. And we also had another head count in there for half a receivables clerk. We never did hire that person. And then on the communication side, Cassie had a part-time person in for a while, and it became apparent that really didn't need her. And she resigned, and then you took on the task of seeing, can I really do it all? And it did work out. So my congratulations to the 2 of them. So we are left with a net increase of 2 heads in this budget. I'm sorry, Carrie.
That's fine, that's fine. On page 10, there's a discussion of the increases you're going to note in the library budget. Benefits, payroll will increase because of the need for 2 employees in the library to go from part-time to full-time due to the expansion, and the expansion also causes an increase in the utilities budget. And then the last item, I would let Chief Sims and Chief Graves probably speak to. You'll note in their budgets, their supplies expense, specifically software, has increased significantly, and that's due to the purchase of some mobile dispatch software.
So it's, I think it's the same for both of us for the most part. But it's, as on the police side, I'll speak of, we're pushing out the mobile computers in the cars, which allows the officers to stay out in the field, do their work in the field. The part of that is mobile dispatch, which means the dispatchers on some calls, instead of tying up the radio, that then the officers can't check out on traffic and do other things. They'll push out non-priority calls through the computer. The officer will have everything on their screen. They won't have to keep asking, hey, where was that? What was this? Who was this? Everything will be right there. It's called mobile dispatch. And so that software, I was able to get the company to give it to us for free last year as we pushed out some of our computers because we didn't have them all out there, so they gave it to us free last year. But this year we have to pay for it. And it's a substantial, I think it was about 45,000 or 50,000 thereabouts for the software. On the police side, I'm not sure about the fire side, it's about the same thing.
That's not quite that much. 29,000, something like that.
But that's why you see that substantial bump in that line item. And it is substantial, and that'll be something we have to absorb on an annual basis, but it is something that's very necessary. It'll make our officers much more efficient, much safer. They'll have the information with them. They won't tie up the radio as things get busy out there. On the fire side, I'm sure, sort of the same sort of thing.
Basically the same thing. It'll add, for us, it'll add hydrant locations where we'll be able to see where the hydrants are at. As we're approaching the scene, we'll be able to see those on the mobile CAD.
And eventually for us with mobile dispatch, the same thing, we'll be able to eventually locate our cars. So we'll have a monitor in dispatch, and we'll be able to see where all the cars are in the city, which will help the dispatcher dispatch the cars.
And the guys hate it.
What's that?
And the guys hate
The
it.
guys always hate it, I know that.
You know exactly where they are all the
Big
time.
Brother's watching, Big Brother's watching.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, we had that in Tucson, they like put a little can over their antenna and jump.
Yep.
Did it work? So you caught them. All of a sudden they disappeared. Okay, where'd you go?
Yeah, it's a good deal, but just the guys just don't like them.
It's hard, change is hard sometimes, but that's the big increase you see on that.
Also with this, you're gonna have a yearly maintenance fee, and then of course, not every year, maybe every other year software upgrades and stuff. But that's all part of it. It's a service contract.
It's usually all kind of rolled in, but once we take that big bite, it shouldn't increase too much each year. So.
On page 11 is a summary of all of the expenditures budgeted. Top half, all the individual departments giving us total operating expenditures budgeted at $17.8 million. Our debt service will decrease by 1 fire truck payment. It drops off the books in November. November is our last payment on one of our fire trucks. And then the capital expenditures below that, giving us total proposed budget expenditures of $19.4 million, which is a decrease over last year of $1.2 million.
Now, we may, on the capital side, I was talking to Chief today, put in an additional $50,000 for a new charger, an all-wheel drive charger for one of our K9 units. That K9 unit was using a Tahoe, which kept failing on us, and we didn't want to have the car heat up and have the dog in the car. And also the officers believe that the chargers are easier on the dogs getting in and out on their hips, according to the vets, as well as the vehicle that is currently being used for one of the animals has 140,000 miles on it.
Yeah, so partway through the year, real quick, partway through the year, we had a Tahoe that one of the canines was in, and it started to fail. It's kind of one of these lemon cars you get, we've always had trouble with it. So a couple of times, the canine handler would be inside. Luckily, he'd have the temperature warning, he'd go out, the car shut off. In the summertime, the dog's in there just about, having a hard time. And so, you see a couple of, you Google this and read some of these stories across the nation about, agencies that kill a canine. It's just not a good thing any way around. So I told them that's it. We just can't fix it. The shop's tried several times. They've done a lot of work on it, and they've tried to. It's just one of these. I don't know. Maybe they were drunk when they made it. I'm not sure. But anyway, so we decided let's take them out. We put them in an older Charger. What my goal was to get a new Charger next year. That was my only car I needed next year was a new canine vehicle to put them in. And then we had to tighten up the budget a little bit, but I'm asking for it to be put back in there. And that Tahoe, though, we're still using it. We're just going to make it a patrol car, because if it shuts off on the cop, he knows if it gets hot, he can get out. So we're going to still run that Tahoe until we run it into the ground, but we're just not going to leave a canine in it.
On page 12, I graphed the expenditures by department to visualize the percentage of our total expenditures that each department is. Fire and ambulance coming in at 30% of total, police at 23%. Which makes sense. Streets at 19%, and then the other departments behind that. The next page is a graph of expenditures by expense category, with payroll and benefits obviously being our most expensive expenditures.
Anything strategically behind moving utilities into IT?
We only move telephone and internet.
Okay, so there is
Because
a sense that could be more centrally managed,
Yeah,
potentially.
it's more of
For
an
less
IT specialty nowadays.
Sure.
Yeah, Steve,
Very, very common.
John owns all the relationships with our vendors, Telecom, Stronghold Data, and others, Dell, so it just made sense to wrap it all in one.
It's easier accounting wise too, which is, I have to admit. Our spreadsheet for allocating telephones and
Yeah, it seems to simplify
internet
things,
is a huge
because
spreadsheet.
like I'm in charge of the technology, but the individual department heads are in charge of the bill, so it's like,
Right,
Yeah.
it just saves a lot of discussion, and makes Carrie's life easier too, because she was
Yeah.
breaking up these bills, is the bill okay with you? Is your bill okay? Is your bill okay? Now we
save
can
my
centralize
eyesight
it.
looking at spreadsheets all day.
Yeah.
We got a lot of phones. Okay, the next few pages are the individual departmental budgets. As you can see in admin, everything went down. Human resources on page 15 only went up a total of 1%. Legal, basically, payroll increase caused a net increase of 3%. IT, that's where you're going to see the utilities expense next to the last row, where they had none the previous year. We're now putting in $137,000, giving them a 40% increase over the prior year, but almost all of their other departments are much less.
What's the increase without that number in there? Did you know that?
Yes, it was within it was 2.58, which
0.58,
was
I think. Yeah.
what we were trying to keep budgets within.
That money the rest of it's absorbed in other departments, it isn't like it's brand new money. The
No.
137,
No. It's out of other departments and
Right,
into
so
this one.
so it isn't like it's 137 extra.
Right.
It just got rearranged.
Yeah. Community development, Their operations expense, next to the last line, that is where that traffic light expense being transferred from streets to community development is being reflected.
And the reason again for that is Doug has the relationships with all the vendors, so it made more sense to keep the money going where the vendor relationship is. It was too difficult for Mike to figure out who to call, so Doug has taken it on.
In actual operation, all the bills were being sent to Doug's department to approve and code in our system of electronic requisitioning, and then they would code them to streets department, which made no sense. So it's hitting Mike's budget, but he wasn't observing the invoices or having any say-so in it, so it made more sense to move it to community development.
And this, I'm sorry, this includes the extra person?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, payroll.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
But before that, before the increase, we were at 30.
Yeah. Yeah. Court has a 4% increase, mostly due to payroll increases.
What's interesting with the court, you know the monthly report that Tabitha sends out to all of you, and it shows you, the actual revenue coming in. If you look at it, the city is averaging about $10,000 every month. So our cost is a little over $40,000. It's one of the few departments where we can actually look at the revenues coming in and see the costs coming out. So it's more than just a cost center. You can actually sometimes call it a revenue. And it's very interesting to watch, how it changes. This does not include Mr. Kelly and Ms. Clark. This is strictly the two out in the courthouse, and the rents and everything else that goes with it.
So does this include the judge?
No.
Yes, it does.
Oh, yes, it does. I'm sorry, that's the 833? Yes, it does.
10,000 a year is in operations for the judge, our share of the judge's pay.
Yeah.
We split that with the county and the city of Bentonville, the city of Cave Springs, and the city of Pea Ridge.
Yeah.
But it's not in payroll, it's in operations. Police department, supplies expenses, what we were talking about, the software. The reason for that large increase there. Same for fire and ambulance. And the large increases in payroll, again, is due to the SAFER grant decrease reimbursement.
And Chief, we're putting out another ambulance for remount this coming year.
That's correct.
Yeah. Streets has a net 4% increase.
I have a comment on streets. I'm not suggesting a change in this year's budget, but the one thing we identified at our last street department meeting that's really an ongoing problem that we don't think the city's put enough focus on. Well, first of all, let me say the streets has been very successful under this administration. Stopping the chip and seal has been really well. To say it's been well received by the citizens would be an understatement. And in certain years we've thrown extra money at it, and it's really helped. So I feel good about what we've done. The one area we've noticed is drainage, and I'm thinking in the future we need to start maybe trying to pick it off a little at a time. Maybe Mike Button could name 3 or 4 particular projects and how much they might cost. Because, we're getting flooding the same places over and over again and tearing the roads up. And so it's not rocket science, but it's going to take a little money to start working on this problem.
And we did a little bit of that this year, Mike. We did Copenhagen, and we also did
We've
down
had
along
some
Chelsea.
FEMA projects where we've mitigated and
So we were lucky.
Put
we
in
had the
larger
FEMA money,
conduits and that
FEMA
type of
agreed to let
thing.
us use that money, but you're right.
Yeah.
Drainage is a huge problem in Bella Vista.
I mean, most of the drainage infrastructure was obviously put in like back in the 60s, and it's metal and it's starting to rust out, and most of the damage that we get is those pipes that they're rusted out and the water just eats them away.
One thing is, as is typical with Bella Vista, it's legally complicated when it comes to drainage. And the reason for that is that we have the dedicated rights-of-way to the public, which we have control over. But then, according to most of the subdivisions that were filed in the plats, the drainage easements were reserved to the developer. And they run so many feet on each side of that, or also in between every single lot. And so, in terms of a lot of the drainage problems, it's a matter of the private correction of the drainage issue in the private drainage easement.
Yeah.
Because we end up putting street drainage in a designated drainage easement, but if that's not been appropriately maintained by the private interested parties, you end up with a problem. And then in most cities, people, you look at the city about drainage, and obviously, and we do have the authority to fix drainage. But it is an interesting twist in Bella Vista that we will have to deal with more as we get more into drainage, and we're going to have to. But
Yeah, between the lots, it's like 10 or 12 feet, isn't it? It's 5 or 6 feet.
7.5
on
or
each.
so.
Yeah, so 15 feet.
so you got these culverts that are just aimed to shoot right between these houses. And there may or may not be a ditch there. There may or may not be anything to contain that water. That's true. And those are private drainage easements. They're not for the benefit of the public.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I showed
Creates
a house
issues.
a week or two ago, a couple of weeks ago, and it was cut down about 6 feet, and it was like about that far from the house foundation, and I said to my buyers, you don't want this house.
I haven't been down, I could just go look at Chelsea. How are those culverts coming down there? We got one done, right?
We done one.
And then everything's priced.
The intent was to try and do another one this year, but then we had that little windstorm that come up.
Yep.
So that kind of put a hiatus on that. Yeah,
Detoured you a little bit?
kind of detoured, yeah.
But you did a great job.
Yeah, it looked great. Yeah.
I haven't been to the one on Highland there where it comes down into Chelsea. Is that,
It's,
you're gonna put some...
we're still waiting for the asphalt contractor to pave over the top of it.
What about the protection on the banks?
And that is also scheduled,
To be done
Yeah.
this fall?
probably within sometime this week.
So I'd be concerned if we had another
Yeah,
spring
wash it
with a
out,
lot of
yeah.
rain, it would wash it out.
Library?
Page 23, library, utilities expense, what was discussed, the large increase, it looks very large when you look at the percent column, but it's actually a dollar increase of $7,500 over the prior year budget.
And that's because of the projected operating costs of the building.
Yes,
Primarily.
additional square footage to heat and cool. Debt service on page 24 illustrates the drop in the payments for the fire truck. Other than that, the interest and principal on the street building, the change is a wash. You're making the same amount of payments, but less on interest and more on principal.
How long until this is gone? The debt service? We're not too far out in the future, right?
We'll be finished with one of the fire trucks next year.
Right.
And then the street building, I'd have to look. Well, I lost mine.
I think it's 22.
Yeah, I don't have that memorized.
But it's like 20, I said it's not too far out there.
Yeah, it was just a 5-year loan.
These are all Amendment 78 loans.
Yeah,
most you can do is 5 years on this.
yeah.
Do you have the balances that are due on each of these accounts?
And they were, the balance was
Well,
on the
loan
audits,
principal's in
the
here.
2018
The
audit.
loan.
Well, these are just 1-year
These are the
principal payments,
payments.
principal and interest.
Oh,
This is the
that's
principal
what-
and
These are
interest
not the
payments,
balance.
it's not the
Okay,
balance
sorry,
that's
sorry.
on the account, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The next page is just a calculation to show you how the transfer, the necessary transfer to the street department is calculated. It's just to give it a zero net. The revenues don't meet the operating expenditures necessary to run the street department. So the general fund has to transfer 1.26 million projected for next year. And that's just another item that has to be budgeted for, even though it's a wash between funds. It's out of one and into another. It's not an expenditure.
Well, only the turn back monies are the ones that are awash, correct? Because the 1.26 is the transfer from general fund to streets.
Mhm. To make the street have a zero net operating
Right.
income loss.
But the real transfer is the cash that the city gets and transferred over at the street department.
No, that cash goes directly to the street
It goes direct
department.
to them?
And it's the
So
only
the
place
transfer
you
is
spend
really
it.
the difference. Shortfall.
Yes, it's a shortfall, exactly.
That's why I was beating the bushes, Larry, to try and see if we were gonna see any increase on the turnback because of that 93
For
million.
that sales tax, or the gas sales tax, fuel sales tax.
What about this deal Mark was talking about? How much money is at stake for us on this?
It's $440,000 a year so
Yeah.
far,
Yeah.
It's 400 and change.
and for 3 more years. And they either pass it come, what is it, March or next fall? Or
In November, it
Yeah,
says.
if they pass it, it continues on forever. That's why they're trying to get it through. If it doesn't pass, that money's gone.
It'll really
Forever.
hurt us if we don't get it.
Well, until they bring it back again.
I don't know if they bring it back if they lose.
Well,
So how much are we gonna spend on street improvements this year? I mean, 2020?
We didn't budget for any extra like we did in 2019. We budgeted only for the 1.2
it,
standard
that's all
amount
streets, okay.
within Mike's street budget.
But isn't the answer to Doug's question that we're gonna spend 3.6 million? That's what we're budgeted for street improvements for next year,
Well-
3.6?
Well, actual
No, that's
paving.
not all. 1.2 is in contracts. That would be the actual,
That's where the
Paving,
actual
yeah.
paving happens by contract.
Yep.
M&R is what the overlays and resurfacings
Slurry.
and seal coats and stuff. Yes, that's the M&R.
the rest is to operate the street department, basically.
And you're gonna have your sign truck this year or next year?
Next year? It's, the bed is in this 2020 budget.
So what happens is, when we send an ambulance off to be remounted, we keep the old chassis and take it back. And last year, Chief Sims actually built a brush fire truck for better response into more remote areas. The one from this year is going to the streets department because Mike can use it. So we try to squeeze as much life as we can out of all the older vehicles.
Next page, 26, is a summary of all of our capital expenditures requested from the different departments. And then the pages beyond that is the detail. As the mayor said, this one on page 27 will increase due to some work I did on Wednesday before the Thanksgiving break, which I'll discuss in slide 31, I think it is. But we do have enough money, it appears we will have enough money to buy a K-9, a new K-9 vehicle, which is not in this version. Page 28 shows the second brush truck
To the west side.
unit. Expenses due to that. Both of those, 12,800 and 8,500 are related to the brush truck. And then Steve's asking to replace 2 old vehicles, a 2008 Chevrolet and a 2011 Ford ambulance, which is a remount of $158,000.
The new ambulance chief still runs about 240?
Probably a little bit more than that now. You got about 3% each year,
Okay.
250.
It's been a few years since we bought the new one.
And page 29 is the detail of the street department's request.
This is primarily because we no longer have a stump dump. And so the challenges that face the streets crew is when they're cleaning out ditches and whatnot, if there's a tree present, they'll cut the tree down, then what do they do with the stump? And so this will be a grinder.
Yes, it's kind of like in between a stump grinder and a forestry mulcher, if you've ever seen one. You could basically go all the ways up to the top of the tree and basically just grind it all the ways down.
Is that like we see Carroll Electric out there with only kind of a modified version?
They have the one, I think, that's got that's a ground one.
Yes.
This one will go on an excavator where you could actually reach up high or way back on a slope or 360-degree movement wherever you need to get.
Does the same thing but on a smaller
Yeah,
scale?
it does, yes, sir.
Page 30 are the IT requests.
John, did we have the hackers come in again this year? And we were secure once again?
Yeah, they were unable to penetrate us externally.
And I know that you're always probing, looking for holes. I think we patched the last one about 2 years ago, which was over in the police department fingerprint machine. It was running Windows 7.
Yeah, there's always new holes, and that's one of the topics out of here is new firewalls. The current firewalls we have were purchased several years ago, and since then we've added dual internet connections, and we need a new set that's rated for these higher speeds. And there are some new threat detection methods that the newer firewalls can do to give us even more protection.
And we now have our new backup disaster recovery sitting over in Pea Ridge.
Yeah, we have, there's basically 3 backup units. There's a master unit in the police station, a master unit at court, and then a secondary unit in Pea Ridge that contains an additional copy.
And we're still backing up all critical systems once an hour.
Yeah, and the other item we have is for the police videos, as we add police officers, as we add cameras, as we have camera footage, we're going to outgrow the current backup system, so I'll need an expansion that'll be able to house all that stuff.
Do we ever hire anybody to try to break in to our system? We do?
Yeah, those are the hackers.
Yeah.
Oh, those are the guys you're talking about?
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I'm talking about.
Yeah, we do hire an ethical hacking firm.
Okay.
Okay, we're on the last page, where we measure our reserve balance against our policy of 25%, no less than 25% of annual budgeted revenue. In between our first budget work in process meeting and this budget, my numbers indicated we would fall below 25%. And so I made some adjustments to what I think our projected reserve balance will be at the end of this year. And you'll see that in the 5th row, the green highlighted row. I adjusted in 2019, started with our audited reserve balance, added in the budgeted revenues, subtracted the budgeted 2019 expenditures, and then from that, I projected that we're going to come in at the end of 2019 with a revenue surplus of $462,000, so I added that in. I projected that we're also going to come in at the end of the year with an expenditure surplus of $1.192 million, so I added that in, giving us an adjusted net operating revenue of $1.8 million. Subtracted from that our budgeted capital expenditures, 2019 capital expenditures were 3.1 million. Now we've got, the next line, we've got an item, it's our
Radio upgrade.
radio upgrade
A-Wings.
that's not gonna be finished. So we've rolled over 35,000 of that project to 2020.
Chief, that's A-Wins?
That's correct. It's the A-Wings patch.
A-Wins is a system that the state wants everybody to move to, so that if there's a really bad emergency, everybody can talk to everybody else. And rather than go to the expense of actually buying into the A-Wins, we have purchased a patch that will connect between us and A-Wins.
Yes, the $35,000 is actually going to add the third channel in the city. They'll allow the A-Wings patch to allow the police to have two channels and the fire department to have two channels to be able to talk amongst ourselves and talk statewide mutual aid if we need to. So that's what that is.
Okay, then the next row is the Mercy Way Bridge savings we budgeted for and will not be spending. That's the 83,000, so I added that in. So that changed our, gave us a contribution or a use of unrestricted reserves for 2019 of 1.2 million. So you subtract that from our beginning reserve balance of 7.886 million. That leaves us with an ending reserve balance for 2019 of 6.6 million, which carries over to our beginning 2020 balance. And by doing that, with the budget as you're currently seeing it, we will end the year 2020 with a 31% reserve.
Okay, so 2019. So because of the water, that's plus 473,000 of what is not figured in here now.
That's correct.
And I was looking too at the left-hand turn lane. There's 150,000 on the line, but we actually spent 108. Is that correct?
Yes, but we have used that savings in other areas.
Okay.
Primarily the traffic lights, Doug, so that we could get the
Okay.
over Kingsland.
And then, so this is something I look at. So what we have spent for 2019 year to date, what we had versus what we had budgeted. From what I think you just said, and you know what, I didn't go line by line, I just added up the big ones. There's 6 of them, and that's $966,000.
In
So-
what, surplus?
Yeah, right.
Right.
So you've actually gone through and projected that.
I
through the end of
projected
the
it
year,
as
put
of
it
the
back
end of
into here.
November, right,
Okay.
for each department. There's no one department there's no single explanation for why I'm projecting we're going to have a surplus, expenditure surplus of 1.192. It's in every department.
Right.
And that's even after, every department sacrificed a chunk of money after the storm. We transferred it to my department. I think we did
And
that.
we didn't
through-
have to touch the reserve.
Right, so we wouldn't have to touch reserve, and we're still coming in at a nice surplus.
Yeah, no, I was just being clear, I just want to be clear that this, where we are, is in here, and it is.
Yes.
Now, we also have been looking 5 years out. It's not on here.
Mhm.
The
The 5 years out figure is still below
now,
25%.
we will be able to make up some of that with the water.
Mhm. Yes.
What about the savings on the Mercy Way Bridge project?
That's, it's
That
weird.
is in here.
But that's just this year's.
That's just, that's only this year's number.
next year's
I
would
could
be
only
bigger.
adjust,
What
I could
about-
only adjust our existing budget to give us a projected beginning
So the
balance.
construction is not in 20, it's in 21?
We're not spending any general fund money
But
on
that-
that bridge,
But that would be reflected as a savings, wouldn't it?
not for 2019.
No, but for 2020, wouldn't it?
But it wouldn't be
It's not in
budgeted.
20. I didn't
Not
even put
budgeted,
it in
it's just-
20.
It's not.
It's not budgeted
not
in
budgeted.
20.
So the construction was in 21?
No, we were gonna have to put it in 20, but they didn't because of the grant, so it just was, so it doesn't show a
It
savings.
doesn't show up.
even though in practicals, it's dollars we're not spending, but it
The
doesn't show up.
reality is money we're not spending though, and it was budgeted.
No, it was
No,
not.
because we didn't
No.
do the 2020 budget yet.
We're just now doing the
Doing
budget
it.
for 2020.
But there was discussion about backing out of all of it and not.
Had we not got that last grant, Larry, we were gonna back out of the whole thing.
Right.
We
Well,
did
that was
budget
one
for it.
option, but then the Walton Family Foundation stepped up with
Right.
our share plus the pedestrian walkway share.
Plus, we got another 300,000 from RDOT.
Right, another RDOT additional grant, so, but I would, somehow, it would seem to me that since it was a budgeted number in our capital projects, it would show up here somehow.
It does. The savings from what we budgeted in 2019 is 83,288.
But that was our expenditure for 2019. That wasn't the whole project, was it? We didn't
That was
budget the
all we
whole-
budgeted for.
Problem is, there wasn't money to do it.
That was all we
It
budgeted
wasn't in
for
the-
in 2019.
Right, yeah.
So I can only
understand
add
that.
back.
But in 2020, that's why I'm asking the question, when is the projected construction schedule? Is it 20 or is it in 21?
It's over the next 3 years, but it doesn't affect our budget. Because we're not
Because we're not
budgeting for it in
spending it.
2020. Because it's not being paid for out of our general fund.
But we had budgeted for it.
No,
No.
we only
Because we
budgeted 1
didn't
year
do
at a
the
time.
2020 budget yet, that's what we're doing now.
The 5-year plan is what you're thinking of, and
Right.
that's not a budget, that's just a projection.
But it is a plan for commitment of funds.
No.
No, no, it's just a plan.
It's just a plan to keep us on track with our minimum reserve. Yeah, it's
No,
just
it's-
a plan,
Yeah.
it's not a budget.
So we got the good
Well,
news before we
it would
did
seem-
budget.
It would seem to me that that's not
Exactly.
true, because we're committed, as an example, the Mercy Way Bridge, we're committed to proceed with that because we've accepted the funding.
And we will, after the year end, those are restricted funds.
Right.
This budget that I do before year end is just for unrestricted funds. We do a separate budget for the restricted funds, and we will budget to use those restricted funds in February. I like to know what my balances are and all those restricted.
Year-end closings.
Yes, because I keep track of all those separate restricted funds. And so I won't know until February what the beginning balance of those funds are.
So what you're saying is that we had committed out of the general fund to spend the 83,000
Right,
for Mercy Way Bridge
out of the general.
out of the
Out of our
general
own
fund,
money, right.
which was unrestricted as opposed to restricted. right?
Yes, yes,
That's why we have zero.
Correct.
yeah. Because now we have
In
0,
20.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense now.
Before, if we were going to have to spend 1.2 million before the Walton Family
Yeah.
Foundation grant and RDOT.
Did you redo that spreadsheet? Because, I mean, like you said, it was in the projected, right, for 2020, and I understand, and, you know, this is a new 2020
Yes, the
without the
5-year
Mercy Way
plan,
Bridge.
the 5-year plan is constantly being updated.
Yeah, so do you have the most recent file on that, Excel file?
Mhm.
Okay, because I'd just like to see it, if you can just email it to me.
Sure.
Anybody else need additional information? We did a ton of it.
I would ask that maybe you send that out to everybody so that.
Okay.
we have that, in case others are interested.
I don't have any question on the budget. So where are things like the trails, our maintenance for the trails, where does that fall?
It's in community development.
Community development, okay.
That's a line item budget, I'm assuming. Is it split at all between the trails that we have so that we can allocate the commitment that Walton Family has provided to us for 20,000 to maintain this one, 30,000 to maintain that one, and 40,000 to maintain that one over a certain period of time?
You're asking?
I'm just pulling numbers out of the air.
Oh, okay.
There is a commitment by them to do certain maintenance for certain trails for a certain length of time.
Well,
It's the whole system.
All we have.
Whatever needs it's coming out of the pot, regardless if it's going east, middle, or west. There's no 30 here, 30 here, 30 there.
So it's
There's
not
90
really-
here, and wherever you need it, use it.
So So it's not related to a particular segment of the trails when they
No.
gave it to us? Okay, all right. So it's just gross.
Pretty much.
You spend it where you need it.
Well,
All right.
not quite. They did give us some maintenance for the back 40. That has been used up and finished. So between ourselves and the POA, we're on our own.
That's been used up for this year, but when we do the restricted funds budget, we will.
We'll have revenue.
But for
again
the central
going into the
area,
fund.
there is still some money left.
We won't have any more revenue than we've
Well,
already received,
the money
but we'll be
that's-
spending more of what they dedicated to us
That's what I'm
for.
getting at.
Right.
Yeah. They have allocated more for 20 when you do the restricted budget.
They
That will show
allocated
up
us 50 total. We've already spent 20, more than 25 this year.
So whatever's left will go into
But
20.
again, that wasn't general fund money.
And I'm also asking if they come in under budget, which may not be the case, on the new Sugar Creek, almost called it 1100, if they can allocate the underrun to us for budget purposes. We got a lukewarm on the first run around, but I'm gonna try again.
So in the trail maintenance, we're committed for 35, and they're going one pot. 35 for the back 40 and 35 for Sugar Creek, right? Okay, so how do we do with that? The 35 for the trail maintenance? Did we, I'm sorry, maybe you already said.
What do you mean?
Well, we were allocated 35,000, we're committed, and the POA's committed for 35,000. So did we spend $70,000 for trail maintenance on the back 40 in 2019?
No.
Yeah. And how's that money spent? I mean, what do we do? Hire crews to go out?
There are crews, so the way it works is, a couple of years ago, we moved the maintenance responsibility over to the POA, because they have more employees that they can pull out if needed be. And then they send us the bill, and we keep the programming and the special events, such as the upcoming run and ride in a couple of weeks. And they are tracking it, they send us an invoice so that we can track it. Take for example, the Straight Line winds that came in, there's an actual contractor that we have that goes out and he cuts the trees, and there were 400 of them, and that was the 25,000 grant that we got, because it was going to really crimp our 35,000 between the two of us. So Tom Walton said, okay, well, we'll pay for the cost because it's an extraordinary event. We do get money from the, or I'm hoping we're still going to get it, from the annual run and ride that's coming up. The past 2 years, we've received a check from Rush Running for $7,000 each year, and that goes towards maintenance on the trails. 1 year it went towards the water fountains. So we get that offsetting. I think that's the only one we've seen in the last year.
No, we get the Belvista Foundation also gets.
Oh, that's right, the foundation gave us. So there is other money that comes in that we allocate, and we split with the POA towards trail maintenance. Yeah.
Okay, but basically the POA manages it.
They manage it, that's right.
The demos for the buildings that we did this last year, do we try to build a family's pack at all?
We can do that, and then if it's not paid, then it's a lien.
Right, I understand. I just didn't know.
But
We go to
they just
this
got
first.
knocked down here, what, about 2 weeks ago?
Last week.
So that process, there'll be another notice process and whatnot in order to do that, but you'll see that.
Were they able to salvage much out of those buildings that they were talking about?
The demo contractor didn't, the owners went and got a bunch of stuff
That's
out.
what I'm saying, were they
As
able
well
to?
as other people.
And the museum got it.
Yeah, they donated a lot of furniture and stuff to the cabin at the museum.
And they have the nice paisley sign that's on the inside as well.
The problem with putting a lien on the property is worth $3,000, and we spent 15 trying, it's gonna sit there, just like that property out in Washington, what's that gonna cost somebody to buy it?
Well,
We destroyed
9
it.
Washington Lane, I can't remember, but
It's gonna be about a $40,000 lot.
basically makes them unmarketable in the current environment.
Yep.
Our lane's gonna be about 6,500, so not too terrible.
No, that's not.
I mean, there's some good sight lines up there, and it's possible.
Yeah, but no septic.
Exactly,
Little problem.
exactly.
And just, so, and
55
one last
gallon.
question.
There it is.
And maybe it's not on, I
Septic,
don't know,
55 gallon.
but on the hole in the wall defense or the attorney for that, where does that get billed?
That comes out of your budget, does it not? Tim?
Some of it did, but then I don't think we ended up doing that. Gary,
No, we
you
pulled
came
it
Well,
out
that's
out.
right, because it was gonna drain his budget, so we moved it.
Yeah.
That property is now listed for sale as of Wednesday.
Oh, it is.
It's the B lot.
Well, let's not get too much in their private affairs publicly. That's a kind of a separate issue altogether.
Okay, so we, thank you very much. I know this has been long, but this is a very important meeting. We will be tweaking it yet again, so you'll have another kick at this at the work session, and we'll spend as much time as necessary to go through it, so everybody's very comfortable with it. And then at the regular session, staff will ask for your approval to move forward.
So by law, you have to approve a budget on or before February 1st of next year. If you don't approve an annual budget by the end of this year, then you have ordinances on the books that say that we proceed with the current year's January budget. So basically what that would mean is the lights would stay on, there would be no salary increases, no adjustments or anything. No new capital projects can be entered into until you approve a budget at the end of that month. So we've never gotten there, but that's what happens if, so.
All right, thank you very much. Safe home.
Thank you.
I don't have my.
Hey, James.
But I-